So, let's go ahead and call it. This wasn't just a backfire. It was a full-blown policy boomerang that hit the US square in the face. The 2025 oil tariffs were supposed to be a flex, another chapter in America's increasingly aggressive trade strategy. The goal? Apply pressure on foreign partners, force renegotiations, bring supply chains back home. But one glaring exception in that tariff package.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Told the real story, Canadian oil. Because the second you try to sanction your largest supplier in can't, you've already lost the leverage you're pretending to have. Over 60% of all US oil imports come from Canada. And not just any oil. This is Alberta's heavy crude, the thick, sludgy grade that American refineries are literally built around. This isn't interchangeable. You can't swap it out with a lighter blend from West Texas or the Middle East. The machinery doesn't work that way. These refineries in the Midwest and Gulf Coast are hardwired to handle the specific properties of Canadian crude. Retooling them would cost billions. Doing so would cause shutdowns. Gas prices would spike. It would be a nightmare. So when the US launched a broad range of tariffs on Canadian exports, it quietly left oil alone. No press conference, no tough talk, just an exemption buried in the details. Because cutting off that flow would do more damage to America than to Canada. And Canada knew it. That's what makes this story so dramatic. US made a big move, and Canada didn't retaliate. It outmaneuvered. With the Trans Mountain Expansion project completed in 2024, Canada suddenly had something it never really had before: freedom. That pipeline gave Alberta's landlocked oil sands direct access to the Pacific Ocean. Meaning, for the first time, Canadian oil could skip the US entirely. And that's exactly what started happening. By the middle of 2025, nearly 400,000 barrels of oil per day were heading out of Canada, not to American buyers, but to Asia. China, in particular, stepped in fast. India, South Korea, Japan, they were all ready. Because in a volatile global market, Canada's oil comes with something most countries are desperate for: stability. While the US was trying to control Canada with trade policy, Canada was diversifying, opening new markets, signing new deals, building long-term partnerships with countries that want predictable supply, not political drama. And here's where it gets strategic. This isn't just about selling oil. This is about turning Canadian crude into a global commodity, not a regional one. That shift matters. It means Canada doesn't need the US the way it used to. And that changes everything about the power dynamic. Because now, when the US makes demands, Canada has options. When the US threatens trade consequences, Canada knows it can keep the pipelines running and just send the oil somewhere else. And when the US tries to assert control, it finds itself up against the one thing it can't tariff into submission: its own dependency. That's what makes this a textbook case of strategic miscalculation. The US was operating on the old assumption that proximity equals control. That because Canada shares a border, its oil would always flow south. That Alberta's crude was America's by default. But the completion of Trans Mountain and the surge in exports to Asia blew up that entire idea. The dependency was never mutual, it was one-sided. And when Canada cut the cord, the US was left holding infrastructure it couldn't rewire. And speaking of infrastructure, this is where the story gets even more lopsided. Canada's ability to build export corridors has turned into geopolitical leverage. The Trans Mountain Expansion isn't just a pipeline, it's a corridor of escape. It allows Canadian producers to access international markets, compete on global pricing, and develop relationships with countries that value transparency and long-term deals. And those countries, they're buying into what Canada is selling. Because in a world defined by energy instability, Canada's entire strategy stands out. It's not just about oil, it's about reliability. Canada's market is open. Its regulatory framework is stable. Its governance is predictable. It's been ranked the most open energy market among G7 nations. That's not fluff. That's strategic currency. That transparency has become Canada's soft power. While other energy exporters are using supply as a political weapon, cutting deals in the shadows or holding contracts hostage, Canada is building trust. And that trust turns into long-term trade, into investor confidence. into global influence that lasts far longer than any temporary price dip. And back in the US, that old dominance is now constrained. The dependency on Canadian oil isn't just inconvenient, it's structural. There is no quick pivot. There is no easy substitute. The entire refining system is a mirror reflecting that vulnerability. And any attempt to change that would cost time, money, and political capital that no administration is willing to spend. So instead, the US is stuck in the mirror wall effect, trying to control something that's already out of reach, only to see its own weakness reflected back at every turn. Canada, meanwhile, has moved on. While American tariffs made headlines, Canada signed deals. While the US tried to protect supply routes, Canada expanded them. And now, Canada is no longer a passive supplier. It's a strategic player, one that can say yes or no on its own terms. That's not just a win for Canada. It's a shift in the global energy order. And it raises the biggest question of all: is power really about building walls? Or is it about building corridors, routes that give you flexibility, reach, and influence beyond your borders? In 2025, it's clear which side Canada chose. And it's just as clear which side is working. So where does this leave the US? Cornered by its own decisions, dependent on a partner it tried to control, caught between the political need to stand tough and the economic reality that it can't afford to alienate the one country keeping its energy system afloat. And for Canada, it's the payoff of quiet, strategic planning. It didn't shout. It didn't retaliate. It just built pipelines, partnerships, independence. That's the real power play. Let us know your take. Was this the most predictable policy collapse in recent history? Or did Canada just flip the script while no one was looking? Like this if you think the real winners are the ones who build corridors, not walls. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more breakdowns of the drama, the strategy, and the global standoffs that never unfold the way anyone expects. And the most remarkable part: none of this happened with fireworks. Canada didn't storm out of trade talks. It didn't escalate on Twitter. There were no sanctions, no threats, no retaliatory tariffs. It didn't need any of that. Because the most effective response to American pressure wasn't outrage, it was options. And the most powerful move was simply building the ability to say no. That's the quiet strength behind this entire shift. While the US was focused on asserting control through policy and protectionism, Canada was focused on resilience. It understood that real influence in a global economy doesn't come from dependency, it comes from diversification. And once it finished the Trans-Mountain expansion, the dynamic flipped. Alberta's oil no longer moved exclusively through American-controlled routes. For the first time in decades, Canada could reach Asia directly, and it wasted no time doing it. By mid-2025, nearly 400,000 barrels of oil per day were flowing to international markets. That's not a symbolic gesture. That's a complete realignment of energy logistics. And it's not just a win for Canada. It's a warning for every nation betting on coercive economics. You can't tariff your way out of a supply chain you don't control. Because while Washington thought it was locking Canada in with policy, it was actually exposing just how locked in America already was. The refineries, the infrastructure, the heavy crude contracts, none of it could pivot. It was all built on the assumption that Canada would never walk away. That Canada had no alternative. But now it does. And not only that, it has global partners who want in. China, India, South Korea, Japan. They're lining up for reliable energy sources. Not volatile, not politically weaponized, just consistent. And Canada, with its reputation for transparency and long-term reliability, checks every box. This isn't just about oil exports. It's about soft power, the kind that doesn't require threats, but earns respect. When global markets see Canada as the stable alternative, it changes who sets the terms. It's no longer about who has the most oil, but who can be counted on to deliver it. That's why the term stability buffer isn't just a throwaway phrase. It's the new identity Canada has carved out for itself. Not the flashiest player in the energy game, but the one that always shows up. On time. In full. Without the drama. And in 2025, that's become a premium. While other energy-producing nations flirt with sanctions, cut off supply, or use exports as leverage in global conflicts, Canada is simply showing up with contracts, tankers, and infrastructure that speaks for itself. And here's what makes this whole thing so telling. The US never saw it coming. Because it was still treating energy dominance like it was 2005 when control meant volume, and volume meant power. But in today's world, control isn't about volume. It's about connectivity. Who has the most routes? Who has the most partners? Who has the infrastructure that lets them pivot fast when the pressure's on? The answer's no longer America. It's Canada. Every new pipeline, every export terminal, every bilateral deal, it all feeds into a bigger picture. Canada's not just a regional player anymore. It's becoming a global energy hub, with the credibility to back it up. Meanwhile, the US is sitting on refineries that can't operate without a crude type it doesn't produce. It's locked into a supply relationship that, ironically, it tried to control with policy it can't enforce. And that's the kicker. The very tool the US used to try and reinforce dominance, tariffs, became the spark that pushed Canada to move faster, build more, and break free. It's the textbook definition of the mirror wall effect. America built barriers to keep Canadian influence in check, only to end up exposing its own structural weaknesses. Every time it flexed with trade penalties, it revealed how little room it had to maneuver. And every time Canada responded with quiet, calculated expansion, it made the US position weaker by comparison. Because the truth is, influence isn't loud, it's lasting. And Canada's influence is starting to last longer than America's threats. You can see it in how the markets react. You can see it in where the tankers are headed. You can see it in who's signing new deals and who's scrambling to maintain the old ones. And you can absolutely see it in how Washington is now handling Canada more cautiously, less publicly. Because it knows any disruption could send shockwaves through domestic gasoline prices, refinery output, and economic stability. The US tried to push Canada into a corner. Canada just opened the floor plan. So where does it all go from here? Unless the US is willing to spend billions to re-engineer its refinery system, it has no real way to reduce dependence on Canadian crude. And unless it wants to risk economic pain at home, it can't afford to disrupt the flow. That means Canada holds real leverage and the US has limited cards left to play. And the rest of the world, they're watching carefully. Because this isn't just a regional trade spat. This is a live demonstration of what 21st century energy power looks like. It's not about tariffs. It's about trust. It's not about walls. It's about roots. And Canada is the one building them. So the next time you hear talk about American energy dominance, ask the obvious question, dominance over what? Exactly. Because if the US can't touch its biggest energy import without risking its own economic stability, who's really in charge? It's not just about barrels. It's about who has the ability to choose. And Canada, through strategy not aggression, has given itself that ability. No threats. No retaliation. Just options. And if there's one thing this entire saga proves, it's that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just reroutes a pipeline and lets the numbers speak for themselves. Let's be brutally honest. America walked into this thinking it had the upper hand. It thought it could isolate, tariff, and pressure its closest trade partner without suffering blowback. But that strategy only works when you're not holding the short end of the stick. And in 2025, the short end is American energy policy. The US assumed Canada would take the hit. That it would, like always, grin and bear it. Because for years, Canada had no real alternative. Alberta's oil was landlocked. The US was the only feasible buyer. And American infrastructure, refineries, pipelines, terminals held all the cards. Or so it seemed. Then came the Trans-Mountain expansion. After years of delays, political battles, and industry hand-wringing, Canada finished the one thing that fundamentally shifted the game. A pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific. A straight shot to Tidewater. And with it, a direct line to Asia. And this is where things get real. Because that project didn't just unlock markets. It unlocked leverage. Suddenly, Canada wasn't boxed in. It wasn't limited to selling to one neighbor. It could send its oil, its most valuable export, anywhere. And the first country to answer the call, China. By mid-2025, nearly 400,000 barrels per day were skipping American ports entirely. That oil was being loaded into tankers bound for Beijing, Seoul, Mumbai. It was Canada's quiet announcement to the world, we're no longer tied to one buyer. And the US. It couldn't do a thing to stop it. Not without wrecking itself. Because here's the part they don't say in press briefings, those American refineries, the ones dotting the Gulf Coast and Midwest, they can't function without Alberta's heavy crude. They were designed around it, optimized for it, completely reliant on it. Switching to another type of oil isn't just difficult, it's prohibitively expensive. Retrofitting a single refinery can cost billions. Multiply that across a national refining system, and you're staring down a total overhaul that would take years if it's even logistically possible. So while America talked tough on trade, it had to quietly exempt Canadian crude from its own tariffs. Because touching that supply would be like pulling the plug on its own energy grid. That's the contradiction at the heart of this story. The US wanted to assert power, but had no way to do it without cutting off the fuel it literally can't function without. So instead, it drew a line everywhere except where it mattered most. And in doing so, it exposed the very weakness Canada has now leveraged into global strength. And strength is exactly what Canada has built, step by step. The Trans Mountain expansion wasn't just a pipe in the ground, it was an exit plan. And when global partners saw that Canada could now ship its oil without being funneled through US bottlenecks, they lined up fast. Because here's what Canada offers that many other exporters can't: stability. No sudden nationalizations. No weaponized supply threats. No civil unrest disrupting flow. Canada delivers on time, by contract, with transparency. And in a world full of energy volatility, that's become more valuable than the oil itself. That's why Canada is now being described as a stability buffer. It's not just another supplier, it's the one buyers turn to when other markets become too chaotic. And while the US tried to frame itself as the strong man in the room, Canada played the long game. Quietly, strategically, without theatrics. And now, it's reaping the geopolitical rewards. Because energy isn't just a commodity, it's leverage. And when you have the ability to choose your buyers, you suddenly control more than just your own market. You shape global flows. You influence pricing. You dictate terms. That's what Canada has achieved, not by fighting back, but by building out. And here's the kicker. Canada didn't even have to say no to the US. It just had to say yes to everyone else. That's how you shift power without making noise. Meanwhile, the US is boxed in by its own infrastructure. It can't walk away from Canadian oil. It can't replace it without rewriting decades of refinery design. And every barrel Canada ships overseas instead of south just makes that box a little smaller. It's the mirror wall effect. Plain and simple. Washington thought it was walling off Canada. What it ended up doing was building a mirror one that reflected back the very vulnerability it was trying to hide. The more it tried to control the relationship, the clearer it became that the US had no real control at all. Canada doesn't need to retaliate. It doesn't need to warn or threaten or embargo. All it needs to do is keep shipping. Keep signing deals with Asia. Keep strengthening ties with Europe. Keep showing up to global energy summits as the reliable one in the room. And every step of that process moves Canada further from dependence and the US further into it. Because what's happening here isn't just about oil. It's about what kind of power lasts. Tariffs are temporary. Trust isn't. Control is fragile. Options are enduring. And in 2025, Canada has those options. The US doesn't. So where does this all lead? Probably to a quiet recalibration. Washington will continue exempting Canadian crude from its rhetoric. Energy planners will work overtime trying to diversify, knowing full well there's no short-term fix. And in Ottawa, there will be no victory laps, just more corridors, more deals, and more leverage that doesn't need to be shouted from a podium. That's what makes this a masterclass in modern geopolitics. Not because of how loud it got, but because of how effective silence became. Let us know your take. Did the US overplay its hand? Is Canada now holding the cards without even flipping them face up? Like, if you're following this slow burn shift in power, drop your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more breakdowns of the behind-the-scenes moves that shape everything from the gas pump to the global stage.